tens of thousands of audiobooks, fiction and nonfiction, all at a very low price of $15 a month. In fact, if you go to the link in the description below, which is audibletrial.com/paranormal-e, audibletrial.com/paranormal-e, that's E like Encyclopedia, you can get a free audiobook. You can cancel it at any time. If you choose to cancel, all the audiobooks you've gotten are yours to keep forever. It's phenomenal. A lot of our past guests are on there. All those Brian here's books are there. John French has one of his books up there, who's on just last week. Carrie Vaughn, her books, the Kitty Norville books. The Werewolf Radio Show host, you know why we love that, are on there. David Stoker's books are on there. Yeah. And I launched into the ad without even doing the introductions first. So if you're wondering who we are, which is possible if you're new to the show, my name is Kevin Mears. I'm a demonologist and a paranormal investigator, and I am the titular Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am joined by my co-host,
Brian McKinley, author and godfather of paranormal thrillers.
So that would be us. And we're still giving our guest a minute before we give this up as something went wrong and come up with something else to talk about.
We could talk about atheism
and skepticism.
And you did a whole thing one time on why Christians are wrong
and why atheists are wrong.
Why atheists are wrong, so that could be something.
Oh yeah, that's certainly a topic. There's something else I think is worth considering that another gentleman I want to have on the show has been talking a lot about on his Facebook page, and I know Suris actually disagrees with him, which is atheism versus agnosticism, and what, if anything, is the difference.
Okay.
So a lot of people I've been over the years have had this misperception that there's theism versus atheism. You believe in a God, you don't believe in a God. And modern atheists since about the 1970s have had this: if you believe God exists, you're a theist. Any other answer to that question than you believe, you're an atheist.
Which is not the case at all.
Well, it's based on literal interpretation. Theism means God. Thei means God.
Right.
Atheism, A means without, so it's without belief in God. A philosopher named Huxley in the 19th century coined a new phrase, which is agnosticism, which traditionally it means I don't know. I don't know if I believe in God. I don't know if I don't believe in God.
Not sure.
Now, in philosophy, as Steve McRae, which would be the friend I commented on, has pointed out continually on his Facebook page, if you ask a philosopher, if you ask anyone in an academic circle what an agnostic is, it's someone who doesn't know. It's someone who's unsure. They don't believe, they don't disbelieve, I don't know. But atheists have been trying to shift definitions and saying that atheist is any answer to the question other than yes, basically.
Okay.
I don't know makes you an atheist. So particularly they've developed this very odd idea which they call the agnostic atheist, which is I believe there isn't enough evidence for God. Show me the evidence. It's some answer to the question. It's essentially a no answer to the question. That's wiggle. I don't know for sure that God doesn't exist, but I'm not convinced he does.
Right.
Type of thing. And to me, it's called you're an agnostic. You're not an atheist. You're just an agnostic.
Yeah, it's about where I fall.
Yeah, that's where a lot of people fall. It's a very common position. Yeah. Even a lot of religious people are fairly agnostic in practice. The counter argument we usually get is that Gnosticism or gnosis means knowledge.
Okay.
So theism is with or without God. Theism, atheism, with or without God. So it's about belief. Gnostic versus agnostic is about knowledge. An agnostic theist, I don't know if God exists, but I believe God exists. Versus a Gnostic theist, I know that God exists. Gnostic atheist, I know there's no God. Agnostic, I don't know, but I don't believe.
It's different ways to split the the same essential question.
True. I have two issues with this. One is the reality of there are a lot of agnostics in the world that choose not to identify as atheists. Why do the atheists now get to go, you're all ours?
Because everybody wants to be inclusive.
On the other side of the equation, Gnostic theist, from a historian's perspective, is a ridiculous term. Because Gnostics are a thing. They have been a thing since the 2nd century AD. It's a heretical sect that split off from Christianity in the 2nd century, about 100 years after the death of Christ, and is based on the various lost gospels, the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and it has some very different views than traditional Christianity. In point of fact, it's somewhat inaccurate to say Gnosticism is from the 1st century. It's actually older than Christianity, but it grabbed onto Christianity and became basically a heresy of it. Gnostics basically are the 1st century, 2nd century equivalent of the New Age movement, because they took a whole bunch of Middle Eastern religious ideas, which of course are now all Western religious ideas, because talking about Christianity, Judaism, things like that. They took a whole lot of those religious rituals and traditions, then they shoehorned in a whole lot of Eastern ideas.
Okay.
And some occultism, and they came up with this weird mix. One of the big differences, although the Gnostic religion is certainly a topic worthy of its own discussion, is that in traditional Gnosticism from the 2nd century, there was this idea called the demiurge, which is, so there's two gods. There's the God who created the physical universe, and then the God who created the soul and the spirit. The demiurge is the God of the physical universe and the creator of matter. What's interesting, in my opinion, about this is it also goes so far as to say the demiurge is evil, and the God that created the spirit is good. In a lot of Gnostic sects, for example, the God of the Old Testament created created matter. The God of the New Testament created spirit. So they're both gods, they're both equal in power. They're just one's good, one's evil. And by this logic, Jesus was purely spirit, so he can't have died on the cross because he's a spirit. How can the spirit die?
Interesting.
That's my other big objection. Besides, now you're all part of us. It's what sometimes I think, in my opinion, is kind of what's called the fallacy of the excluded middle, where it's one or false dichotomy. It's either one thing or the other. It's like, no, it's not that simple.
It's a two-party religious system.
Well, and here's the thing. It's like people tend to think very simply about religion and monotheism, polytheism, atheism. And it's like, there are so many other options.
Well, part of the problem is we're sort of encouraged to think that way by even religious leaders and whatnot. They boil things down. They try to make it a very simple us versus them, because that appeals to
Steve McRae's point, and I agree with him, is the atheists are just doing the same thing.
Yeah. No, and it's because it's an effective tool.
I agree, and that's the other bigger problem is you're turning it into us versus them when it's a sliding scale of weird.
Yeah.
Just like I was looking at a discussion earlier today about, well, can you have an atheistic theist? Someone who is, and the answer is actually sort of yes.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of people who identify as sort of spiritual but not religious.
True, but there's another aspect. So the question of can you believe in the divine, shall we say, without believing in God, goes beyond even the spiritual versus religious argument. There are religions that worship something divine that does not conform in any real way to the Western idea of a God.
Okay.
Because when I say God, you probably think of either Yahweh or Zeus or one of the other gods, who has somebody you can talk to, right?
Yeah.
You can pray to. They have a personality. They have a mind. And look at a lot of the traditional polytheistic religions. The ancient Greeks, the Norse, etc. The gods are sort of humans with superpowers.
Yeah.
They still have human failings, human weaknesses, human thoughts, human desires.
Right.
But if you look at Eastern religion, particularly Taoism is the big example of this.
Yeah, they just have the Tao.
Yeah, the Tao is some complex thing that you can't, what is the Tao? To quote an old religion professor of mine, the Tao is, and if you ask what, or do this to say that you know what the Tao is, you get slapped because you're wrong. The Tao is something you cannot describe by definition. To quote the first line from the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao.
Is not the true way, yep.
Yeah. Or the Tao that is Tao is not Tao.
Yeah.
To more precisely translated. Which is the interest, and it's not a thinking force, it's not a personal being, but it is a universal guiding principle to the universe. A lot of forms of...
It seeks balance as opposed to good or evil.
Yes. A lot of forms of Hinduism actually have the same idea too, where you have this idea called Brahma. Now the Brahma is the fundamental reality of the universe. But the fundamental nature of you, me, everything around us is what's called Atma. Atma is another way of saying Brahma. The universe is God. God is the universe. That's why in Hinduism, some aspects of Hinduism, when you reach heaven, nirvana, your nature, your identity ceases to exist because you simply become part of God again. But again, in some forms of Hinduism, you can't have a conversation with the Brahma because the Brahma is the universe.
Right.
Praying to it would be silly because...
Yeah, some Wiccans don't identify a particular god or goddess. They have just nature.
Or energy. And then if you didn't say energy. Let's see. Okay.
Any word?
Yes, I just heard on... And I just heard back from our guests, so hold on.
Technical difficulties.
No problems. Just things got a little caught up. It's okay. Not a big deal.
It's calling.
I believe. I hope so. And for that matter, there's other religions. Another interesting one that definitely messes with perception. Yes.
We have a caller.
Hello.
Hello, sirs.
Yes, this is Iggy.
Hey.
Hi. Welcome to the show.
Awesome. I'm feeling very weird doing this without my equipment and doing this with a phone instead. But I guess there we are.
Yes.
How are you
We have
doing
plenty
tonight?
of equipment here to make up for it.
It's not. I don't get to speak into a big microphone with big headphones.
Well, if you were down here, you would.
On the other hand, you're also not animated.
Driving over there anytime soon.
He's in Georgia.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a drive.
A little bit. So, how are you tonight?
Well, apparently I'm absolutely awful at working around schedules, so that's about how I'm doing it.
It's okay. Stuff happens.
We were doing a little free form discussion on religion when you were waiting.
Oh boy, that sounds like my wheelhouse or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, how are we going to fill time? It's like, well, I can think of the one thing. So before we jump back into anything like that, why don't you, I can introduce you, but I always feel guests do the best job of introducing themselves. So why don't you introduce yourself and your channel?
Fair enough. Well, my name is Suris. I happen to have a channel called Suris the Skeptic. On there, I've got 2 different shows. I've got video responses where I generally tackle various forms of harm, usually religious harm, but recently it's not just solely been that. I also have Fingers of Woo, where I go after pseudoscientific nonsense, like people who think that drinking their own pee is a good cure-all for things, or drinking celery juice will somehow cure their cancer. And I've also got the LHAC series, which is Let's Have a Conversation, where I go into usually more philosophical topics, things like Clifford's Principle and certain contradictions. But there's also other things that I'll tackle on there as well. Usually that one's more of me monologuing over a particular topic.
Sounds like someone I know.
Yeah, I can't say it reminds me of anyone I know. Which is kind of
well, it is generally said that we know ourselves the least, right?
Yeah, usually. I was gonna say that's kind of what drew me to your both your channel originally and to inviting you on is, well, obviously I being a religious person and you're not, we have a bit of a disagreement. There is certainly a common ground in, 1, talking about philosophical issues, and 2, some of the people that you go after annoy me just as much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as you've talked about, particularly intolerance towards homosexuals, and it's like, yeah, I've spoken out. Our Valentine's Day show, I actually give a speech about, no, Christians, get over it, treat people better.
Yeah, there's unfortunately, unless we're talking about strictly with the Bible, most of the appeals outside of Romans generally end up being Old Testament appeals for maintaining a anti-homosexual stance. And usually when that's the case, I'm just like, okay, first of all, we can exegete that passage and find at least 6 different meanings that aren't about homosexuals. Secondly, you're familiar with the idea of multiple covenants, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one I'm trying to research a little more, is the other, the exegesis and the fact there are other ways of interpreting it. Because it's like, yeah, when you read it as saying pedophilia isn't going to be tolerated, I don't have a problem with that law.
Well, yeah, and usually that's because the word that they referenced at that point, I believe, was pedantry. Mm-hmm. And that dealt specifically with the fact that one of the usages of the word was male, and male strictly meant young boy in that context, I believe. But a lot of it also depends on what chapter and verse you're looking at. The awkward thing is that I've spent more time as an atheist looking into the Bible and researching it honestly than I did when I was Christian.
So let's talk about that for a minute. I know from your channel and from other, the videos I've watched that you used to be Christian. Which sect were you again?
So technically, it was non-denominational. However, anybody who's been a non-denominational Christian knows that really just means Baptist light. The private school that I went to was one that was started by I believe PCA was started by a Seventh-day Adventist and one of the members of the old IFB. So, yeah. IFB being the Independent Fundamental Baptists, of which a splinter group is the new IFB, and that's headed by Stephen Anderson, and tangentially related to the Hovens and all that other fun stuff.
Oh, God, Kent Hovind.
Kent Hovind, the best representation for atheism in Christianity.
I can't argue with that. Yeah, you have to grant him one thing. If Kent ever realizes that his ministry gig is not going anywhere, he's definitely got a career in stand-up comedy ahead of him. He doesn't even have to change the material, just his audience.
I would say that I might lean more towards Aaron Raw's supposition on that, and that it might not be comedy that he's going to have. It's probably just going to be a used car salesman position.
Yeah, Aaron has a point there. Although I'll say this, and I said this on somebody's comment section recently. If I was, I'm not remotely a scientist, so this is never going to happen. But hypothetically, if I was ever going to called to speak about evolution to biologists convention, I would ask Kent to give a 3-minute presentation on what he thinks of evolution, because they say you should always start with a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, usually at that point they'll give you, there are 6 different types of evolution, depending on what the evolutionist is talking about. These are not cosmic evolution, geological evolution, and we go on his entire diatribe of wrong.
It's like, I'm sorry, 4 of them aren't evolution, 3 of them aren't even biology. And the last one, the microevolution, he says it's an evolution. It's like, what? Sorry, folks, for those of you...
His entire thing is then again, his entire thing makes some money, so it only confuse me so much.
This is true. It's an interesting question. Does he believe it, or does he know he's full of it?
I don't think I've got much of a reason to think that he doesn't believe it. The issue with someone like Ken. Hold on, here we go.
You're thinking of Ken Ham, though. That's not.
Who may not believe it. Whether or not he believes it doesn't matter. All that matters is that the people under him believe it.
True.
The people that give him money.
Yeah. See, I
Yeah,
think
pretty
the
much.
argument, I think Kent really is gullible enough to believe it because of the fact that one, when he went into prison for tax evasion, he spoke about hiding assets on a line he knew was being recorded. And two, he used a sovereign citizen argument, and it's like, that's a special. Basically, if you're not familiar with the sovereign citizen movement, is a political.
I'm very familiar with it.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with it.
Yeah.
We had a whole show about it one time. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Unfortunately, the sovereign citizenship argument relies on the idea that humans have inherent rights, not arbitrary rights. And unfortunately, all of our rights are very, very arbitrary.
Yeah, we've seen that in action.
Yeah, it's like you could make. I mean, hypothetically, from a religious perspective, you could make an argument that if God exists, we do have some inherent rights. But which ones those are up to debate on which religion you are.
They would be passed down to you as opposed to inherent to you.
True. And also, you'd have to be able to prove that God exists.
Divine command theory still falls under ethical subjectivism because it's contingent on the mind of the creator. So in a situation like that, you still have rules that are contingent on the mind of that creator or on the mind of that deity. It doesn't even need to be a creator at that point. So I'd say they still end up being, whether real or not, they still end up being arbitrary once passed down.
See, I've heard that argument before, and it's like, I feel like I want to disagree with it, but I can't. There isn't really a good disagreement. Like, at least not that I can think of.
It's like one of those things that you innately want to disagree with, but then, like, as you try to poke holes, you go, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this, and I'd be interested to hear your take. I do think I am a fan of, even taking God out of the equation, I am the fan of there is an inherent sense of morality that most people share. The basic examples of which I would give is most cultures, pretty much every culture agrees that murders, and I mean specifically, premeditated murder is morally unacceptable. Rape is morally unacceptable. Theft is morally unacceptable. Now, lots of cultures all agree that there's some exception where it's okay for me to do this in this instance. But I don't think that's so much a disapproval of my hypothesis so much as an example of humans are remarkably good at justifying their own actions.
Well, and that's why I was going to say that when you brought up the issue of murder and rape, the problem that I usually find is culture to culture, we have different definitions for those words.
Yeah.
True.
For instance, even here in the United States, you've got a lot of your really virulent evangelicals who redefine rape in a way that it can't happen in marriage. It's an issue that we find if you're familiar with the biblical gender roles website.
Oh, God.
The author of that website has made a huge hurrah about redefining rape in such a way that it literally can't happen within marriage.
Which is insane.
No, it's definitely insane because you signing an agreement that you're going to be with someone under a legal pretense does not sign away the rights to your own bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
But apparently that particular author thinks that that's the case. So we would argue as, rational, moral human beings that no, the situations of sexual abuse that happen in there can very much still be framed as rape, but their justification is going to be, no, it's not because insert semantic argument here. It's the same issue you get with murder. So, for instance, you and I would probably consider killing somebody for blasphemy murder because, I mean, it's even though it's a reactionary thing, it's not self-defense, it's not any of that. It really can only be a type of premeditation, so it would be murder. But someone who lives in a culture where a blasphemy law is upheld would not necessarily call it murder. So even though we find these basic things to be abhorrent, as you go culture to culture, we find that these things are framed in such a way that a lot of times they're still allowed just because they've been framed in some special way.
Well, which goes
honor and revenge killings and things like that.
This is true.
Yeah.
But that goes to my point about the human ability to rationalize.
Mm-hmm.
There's an inherent understanding that the act is wrong. You know, the simplest example I could think of is, you know, ask the majority of those people, okay, if you're the one who's going to die or you're the one who's going to be raped, is it still morally right? 90% of them will probably change their mind.
No, that's why appealing to the veil of ignorance is such a useful concept here.
Yeah.
Because when you appeal to something like the veil, and I get that the veil does have some issues, but if you appeal to something like the veil of ignorance, you find yourself in this awkward position where no matter what heinous thing you want to justify against your fellow man, the minute you throw yourself into the shoes of the worst possible scenario, which is what the veil does,
Yeah.
You have to justify that thing happening to yourself. And now you've got to do one of two things: violate yourself, or accept the fact that you're thinking this law to begin with. The unfortunate thing, though, is that even utilizing this is one of the problems with the veil of ignorance, is that even though most of the time someone will recognize that the same thing happening to them would be wrong, when you frame it that way, sometimes they'll say, no, I would deserve it happening to me as well, therefore, insert heinous act needs to still happen regardless. That's one of the only issues. The only issue that I have with the veil is sometimes you get this people who are, I don't use the word masochist because that's not a derogatory thing.
Yeah.
But I guess people who hate themselves enough that they can justify actions on another human being strictly based on the fact that they would do it to themselves. It's the same issue I have with something like the Golden Rule. When someone says that the Golden Rule is the end-all be-all for morality, as if you're familiar with S.J. Thomason, she has said a few times on Twitter, when someone says that, you know, the Golden Rule is the end-all be-all for morality, all you have to do is insert the person, anybody who would violate the veil of ignorance would also violate the Golden Rule, making it not the end-all be-all for morality anyway.
Yeah.
I'd be curious how many people will go that far, though.
But
I mean, not so much how many people would say, oh, well, if it was me, then I would say it's justified because if I did this, it's wrong. But how many people, if it actually came down to pulling the trigger on themselves, would actually do it?
there are a few.
Yeah.
It's enough to concern me. That's my issue.
You have a legitimate point, although I think, frankly, the few that are like that, they've got some serious mental issues.
Oh, they probably do. I doubt that. This is why the veil is usually utilized in a frame for like creating law, as opposed to something that you should use for following for your own personal morals at all times. Because on an individual basis, it tends to not work as well as it does for framing a law.
That makes sense. So to go back to the question I was asking, and we got sidetracked in good ways, and we get sidetracked here a lot, so that's not a bad thing. So what ultimately led to your, as I believe it's called these days, deconversion?
Honestly, and it's not the most exciting story, but it really was just an organic thing. Once I was not being influenced by Christianity all the time, and I had the ability to just be myself, a lot of those faiths just kind of fell away. The first 3 years after I was out of high school, the exact terminology that I used was, well, I believe in the Judeo-Christian God, but I don't necessarily believe in the Bible, because I had done enough research in the Bible to find that, you know, certain things in it weren't necessarily historically accurate. So that caused me to think that it was a little more unreliable. I also had gotten to the point where, thanks to me having a Catholic biology teacher, a lot of what I was told originally by my predominantly ISD school about evolution, a lot of certain things about how the universe works and how biology works were reframed by someone who, as far as I was concerned, as a fellow Christian, started to realize that maybe some of my beliefs weren't really justified. That organic deconversion continued, though, past I believe in the Judeo-Christian God, once I realized that one of the only reasons that I was clinging to that still was, one, it was convenient. If anybody asked me if I was Christian, I could say that, and that ended the conversation quickly. Two, a lot of it came down to just personal fears of things like hell. like, oh, well, if I throw away all of my biblical beliefs, there's still John 3:16 to fall back on. I can still, be a good person and believe in God, and then I'm not going to have to worry about burning for eternity. But as soon as I started to get to the point where I went, well, actually, even that doesn't make sense. Even like the concepts of hell that I was taught, because I know that depending on the denomination, they're different. I was taught the very lake of fire and brimstone version. Once that version just kind of slipped away from my mind as a threat anymore, I just kind of reevaluated myself and said, okay, well, I guess I'm agnostic on the proposition. And then I got introduced to YouTube atheism, which I guess is the technical term for it now, your Aaron Raws, your Matt Dillahunties. Listened to a lot of that and went, okay, well, I guess I'm an atheist. And then I started to research further and went, no, I'm technically still agnostic. I'm only an atheist in the colloquial sense. But based on most philosophical literature, I do fall into suspension of belief on proposition as opposed to believe not to.
I was going to say, I know you're a friend of Steve McRae, and I will say, I'm with respect to your position, I'm with Steve on the whole agnostic versus atheist thing.
Yeah.
And I am as well. The only issue I had with Steve, and I told him it before, the issue is never, is Steve right? Because usually he's well researched enough in his topic to be right. Problem usually comes down to his method. The method he communicates something will usually end up, a lot of times, rub somebody the wrong way. With me, it might just be because I've got some decently thick skin. I can generally take it and go, okay, no, that's fine. For instance, the video that I did recently on the differences between atheism and agnosticism, and which one that we should use, where I took the etymological argument for atheism you see from a lot of the lack of belief set of atheists, and I took the philosophical argument that you get from a lot of your more hard atheists, and put them against each other. These are the two arguments. These are how they work when juxtaposed to one another. My conclusion at the end of that was that it doesn't matter. Use the label that applies to you best, that you think applies to you best. And I ended up running that video by Steve. Like, I actually got him on the phone at 4 in the morning. It was just like, I need you to run through this video real quick before I publish it to make sure that I didn't fuck anything up. So, me and Steve were on the same page on there as well, and I defer to him whenever I'm in a situation like this where I need to figure out how something works. At least when we're talking about the wheelhouse of philosophy, because as much as I research, unfortunately, Steve's got a few years head start on me.
Yeah. No, but that's cool. We were actually just discussing that a little bit before you left, the difference between the terminology of agnosticism and atheism.
I would say one of my central problems with the relatively recent colloquial definition, and I dislike calling it colloquial just because it's become popular with a certain subsect of atheists. It's not how the term's widely used among theists. It's not how it's used among agnostics. I'm not even sure how many atheists use it that way. That it's just
usually from what I've been able to tell, it's the people who've been exposed to Matt Dillahunty, Aaron Raw, and a lot of the more popular YouTube atheists who use the lack of belief position. Or alternatively, it depends on where they looked up the definition. Because if somebody looked up the definition of atheism, in the Oxford Dictionary, it actually does have lack of belief on the actual, it actually has lack of belief in the definition there. And this is where a lot of your etymological arguments come from, because like we use the version of atheism colloquially, atheos, or without theism. So anything that would be classically considered a non-theist, based on the version that we took from France, in the 1600s, I believe, based on that version, that still comes down to atheist.
I can see.
But because that language is sloppy, I think you and I both agree that language is a little sloppy.
I agree.
That's why we get the hyphenated versions of atheism, like agnostic atheist or gnostic theist or things like that. Even though anybody who spends a lot of time studying theism, when they hear Gnostic, they immediately think, you mean not synoptic Gnostic Christians, right?
Yeah.
From the first century, you mean them, right? And they're going to go, well, no, I didn't even know that was a thing. Then we have this other issue.
And for the record, they still exist.
Because Gnostic, when applied to a Christian, has a very particular meaning, not just believe they know that God exists.
We actually had a Gnostic bishop on the show a couple of months back. He was a friend of mine. So I, being a bit of I wouldn't say a religion scholar, but a religion buff, I find what people believe absolutely fascinating, even if I don't agree with them. And actually, a lot of times I agree with them more than people would assume, given I'm Christian. But it's always the thing that bugs me. It's like, no, a Gnostic is a specific thing. It's not just those are my two problems with the whole Gnostic theist, agnostic theist. Is one, a Gnostic theist implies to me Gnosticism, and two is, I would argue that there's really no such thing as a Gnostic theist or a Gnostic atheist, because while people can claim they know, nobody actually knows for certain if God exists or doesn't.
Right, that's kind of the point. That's the
Well, it comes
definition.
down to whenever you ask somebody what a personal theory of truth is, when they ask, or when they try to say that they're a Gnostic atheist or an agnostic atheist or anything like that, a lot of times if you ask them what their personal theory of truth is, they're not going to be able to give you anything. And for me personally, I see truth, knowledge, and belief as a Venn diagram. You believe the things you believe on one end of the Venn diagram, and then the things you know are on the other end of the Venn diagram, but the things that can be known on the other end of the Venn diagram, and truth is somewhere in the middle. Anything you believe that happens to be true is something that you know, but anything you believe that doesn't happen to be true is on the left side of the Venn diagram that just sits there as belief.
So I'm generally of the mindset that something you know is something verifiable. I know if I take my phone off of the table here and drop it, it's going to hit the ground. And if I doubt that, I can take it off the table and drop it. And I can do that. It's something testable. I can't. I'll be the first to admit, while my belief in God is very important to me, I can't test the existence of God. And I know from an objective, rational perspective that my main source of belief in God is personal experience, and personal experience is by no means objective. So it's like, I'm very comfortable just saying, I believe in God. I don't know He exists. It's entirely, I can think of any one of a number of possibilities where all of my experiences could in fact objectively be true, and God may still not exist. Although it gets weirder and weirder. It's usually...
I mean, that's the same issue that you get with, like, I believe Drew from Suris the Skeptic did an entire video on that topic, on how he's had several of what he would consider religious experiences. However, he's come to the conclusion that they don't necessarily lead him to a God belief, therefore maintains being an atheist, or became an atheist after he came to that conclusion, rather.
See, I've had a similar experience dealing with a lot of my friends, because I have many friends who have had an experience like I have, or had multiple experiences like I have, because it's not just one. But the God that they came to that experience with isn't Yahweh or Christ. I mean, I have a very good friend who's had an experience of the divine that, in his mind, most closely resembles the Norse pantheon. And no, I mean, most Christians would answer that with the traditional, either it's demons, which
that's usually the answer that I hear.
Which isn't my answer, by the way.
There's the counterpoint to that usually ends up being, unless you're appealing to like Plantinga, for instance, because he thought that demons could make tornadoes. Plantinga's weird. He's like Isaac Newton. He's brilliant when you talk about certain things, and then when you get other things, it's like, no, Newton, alchemy doesn't work. But unless you're dealing with like Plantinga's demons, there's really not much distinction between what is a demon and what is a deity outside of like amount of power.
Yeah, and at least hypothetically, morality.
Hypothetically, it'd be morality, but then you get into the like if we're talking about Old Testament Yahweh.
Yeah, this is true.
There's an entire discussion that happens usually among atheists whether or not Lucifer was the more moral one in that particular scenario, because the Old Testament version of Yahweh isn't the nicest guy.
No, he really isn't. And there is I have friends who are Jewish, and one of the Jewish schools of thought that at least I've heard of is the problem isn't because of the nature of Yahweh. The problem is in the nature of how Christianity's reinterpreted Yahweh, because at least some Jewish schools have thought Yahweh is both good and evil. And more
That would make
almost,
sense
yeah.
considering that Isaiah, from the Old Testament, Isaiah specifically has a passage about evil coming from God just as light comes from God.
This is true. But here, I'll give you my take, because I think you might find this interesting. Have you ever heard of henotheism?
Yes, I've heard of henotheism and its close cousin monolateralism.
And are you familiar with the fact that the early Jews were, once they moved out of polytheism, which is where they most likely started, like most cultures, they were actually henotheists long before they were monotheists. And there's a whole bunch of verses in the Bible to support that.
Even in a lot of your Old Testament scripture, which comes directly from Judaic thought, there's pantheons involved in that. A lot of it's been kind of scrubbed, and it's just in the Old Testament, but it's still there very clearly.
True, you have the divine council in the book of Psalms, for example, that there's a whole council of gods. And it's interesting to talk to most Christians about that, because it's like, okay, so the Bible says there's a council of gods. And the simplest explanation some of them might give is, well, it's just talking about the Trinity. It's like, well, then how did God judge part of it as evil?
Definitely not.
Yeah. Because one, how does God have a conversation with God himself? That's a little weird. And two, he judges it as evil.
The only time that we see God having a conversation with himself in biblical scripture, as far as I know, is, for instance, the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yes, it's Jesus having a discussion, which is its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of my form of Christianity, which I call myself a non-denominational Christian, not in that I'm part of a formal non-denominational church, but insofar as I don't like the denominations, they pick on each other too much. I just try to follow Jesus. So my view of the world is more henotheistic in, I believe that my God exists. I believe that your God may very well exist as well and may be part of this larger pantheon on which my God sits on the top of. So you're not wrong, you're not necessarily, I'll judge your goodness or your wickedness by what you do, because as the Bible says, you know a tree by its fruits, not on whether or not you happen to worship the God that I worship.
Which is I believe that's the same, don't quote me on this, but I believe Robert Rose of Sentinel Apologetics is a similar stance.
I'd have to look it up, I don't know. I'll say, what I always found fascinating is, as you know, I'm a demonologist, so the exorcist that I worked with before he passed away expressed a very similar mindset before passing. And it's like, that's sort of the last person you'd expect.
It would be kind of weird to see it, especially because there's such a weird, fuzzy line between demon and deity, being a henotheist and also being a demonologist.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like you're walking that fuzzy line.
Yeah. Oh, don't get me wrong. I tap dance on that fuzzy line. That's a common question I've gotten from our listeners is because, I call myself a demonologist. I believe in a spirit world that's vastly more complicated than even just angels, demons, and ghosts. Whenever somebody asks me, so do you believe in fairies? Do you believe in tulpas or whatever weird thing is? Either yes, because it's part of my religion. Yes, because I've experienced it, or I don't know, maybe. Because I'm of the belief the world is more infinitely weird and complex than even I can begin to understand. So I'm not ready to say thing doesn't exist. My concern is usually, okay,
It's UFOs.
No, keep in mind, I believe that people are seeing something that's a UFO. It's the idea that it's an actual alien spacecraft from another world I take issue with.
Yeah.
But whether I label something a demon or something else really just comes down to, is it actually a threat to somebody? Because if you have a spirit that's the perfect example, because there are Christians that will make the argument is, if you have a house that every night at, say, 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody hears footsteps up and down the hallway like clockwork, and there are Christians that will say that's a demon. It's like, it's just doing footsteps. That's all that's going on.
The only thing it's threatening is your sanity.
And maybe your ability to get some sleep.
Yeah.
I'm not ready to label. It's like I have a very pragmatic approach to it. And is there something actually there? Because I've had cases and I've had people who come up to me and it's like, okay, with all love and respect, get your medication stopped. And I've had cases where it was something quite natural. And I've had cases that there were something, in my opinion, something was there, but even when there's something there, the question is it a danger to somebody? And if it's not a danger to anybody, why do we need to go poking it with sticks?
I would say more than human curiosity is generally the answer to that.
And I think that's an excellent answer.
Same reason people climb mountains.
But it's like, I'll put it like this. If you had a ghost in your house, and all it did was like come by and have a conversation with you once in a while when you were awake and in the mood to talk, would you want to evict it?
No, probably not. I think it'd be a really good wealth of conversation knowledge.
Yeah. Plus, if somebody died like 100 years ago, think of the history you could learn. That's kind of how I see it. It's like, is it a problem? And also very fundamentally, and we've talked about this in your comments before, if I'm going to say somebody's got a demon in their house, the first question I want an answer to is there something going on that can't be explained? Because if there isn't...
If it's something that has a very obvious explanation, then there's no need to label it demon, ghost, or anything like that if you can find a naturalistic explanation for it.
And often enough you can. I mean, quite a few times, I'll say quite honestly, with all respect to people who think they have a ghost in the house, quite a lot of people who think they have a ghost in the house watch The Exorcist at 2 o'clock in the morning and can't go to sleep now and think that the window banging because of the wind is Satan.
Or did what I did and played Resident Evil 2 way too late in the night.
Which version, out of curiosity?
Here recently I just got done playing the remake.
What'd you think?
What's up?
I said, what did you think of the remake?
So there are things I like about it and things I don't. As far as the game itself, it feels like I get a similar feeling playing it as I did when I got playing Resident Evil 4 when that first came out. And that it feels like everything in the game is as perfect as it can be, given what it is. The only issue that I have with it, though, is that Mr. X, if you're familiar with him at all.
Oh yeah. I've been playing this remake.
The entity that's supposed to be following you throughout the entire game. He stops being threatening as soon as you realize how to game him. And that's just like as soon as you realize that your run speed is always faster than his walk cycle.
You have a point.
He stops being a threat. Because it's just like, my first time through, I would not use my guns anywhere in the police station because I knew that Mr. X would come looking for me if I did.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time my second playthrough happened, I went, wait a minute, hold on. So if I kill everything in this room before Mr. X gets here, and then I just mosey on out of the room, he literally can never catch me. No, he's not a threat. He's just not a threat anymore.
And having played through the remake, and I like the remake a lot. It's like, it's Mr. X, run for it. And, oh, well, look, I could get away.
The only time that Mr. X is threatening is when you're going through a hallway of lickers.
Oh, God, the
when you
lickers.
can't actually run from him because running would alert the lickers. And that's, I think that's the problem with Mr. X, though, is that he's only ever as threatening as the environment you find him in. He himself is not threatening. If you're on a long hallway and you have no way to, walk away from his hand fists, then he's a threat.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in an open corridor, he's literally a non-issue. Like, you can gather all the items in that corridor, kill all the enemies, and pretend he doesn't exist as long as you don't walk.
There you go. That's a slightly random segue, but our show is full of the random segues.
Yeah.
If you haven't guessed by now, we tend to like to just go where the flow takes us, as it were. And it occurs to me, I never gave out the phone number in case anybody would like to call in with a question. We're almost at the end, but I might as well. So it's 609-807-2492, 609-807-2492. So while we wait to see if anybody happens to call in, let me ask you this. On the woo side of things, what do you consider the worst medical woo that you've covered so far?
So it's hard to say, but I want to say that. Give me just 2 seconds to actually look at my Dangers of Woo theory to refresh my brain, because there's episodes of mine that stick out because I want to say urine therapy.
Yeah, that's
but
pretty
I
bad.
also, even wanting to say that, I know that may not necessarily be the case. So, in Dangers of Woo,
The only thing
it would have to be a tie
Mhm.
between urine therapy. Well, tie between 3 things really: urine therapy, vitamin B17, and faith healing.
And I agree with you on every single one.
And then, well, dang it, I just realized I did an episode on anti-vaxxers as well.
Oh,
And
God.
that's high up there.
We
I
just
think
did
anti-vax is actually worse than both urine therapy and B17.
I think you're right. I think anti-vax, in terms of, on a personal level, the various ones compete, but on a cultural level, anti-vax is by far the most dangerous to society as a
Here
whole.
in the United States, the anti-vax movement is really problematic. And the mindset that you get from some people who are part of that, you usually hear some of the same things, like, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I'm just pro
Choice.
insert argument they had here
Yeah.
for not having somebody poke their body with a needle, basically. And then you just go, okay, but you realize that all of your talking points are anti-vax talking points.
Yeah.
And if you quack like a duck,
It's a dog.
yeah. A conversation that I had recently with somebody on this, and it was somebody who's like near my family, so it was an aggravating conversation. It basically boiled down to what will change your mind. And we really couldn't get a what would change their mind. They just said that my opinion has been formed over a few decades of time, and therefore it's not going to be changed by a single piece of paper. Problem is that the pieces of paper I was giving them were all of the medical research that had been done about things like the MMR vaccine. That was one of the ones they brought up. So I said, okay, I will bring you all of the relevant research papers sourced by this many sources, depending on which paper. This is the research. These are the meta-analyses based on what you're having issue with. And their response was just, well, one piece of paper isn't going to change my mind. And it's like,
How about hundreds?
I'm not asking for one piece of paper to change your mind. I'm asking you to look at the legitimate research. Your position is that the research hasn't been done, and I'm showing you the research.
It's one of the things I find the most irritating about modern day America is the argument, from what I've heard, like, somebody else's ignorance is as good as your facts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just,
My
we
Google
need to,
search is as good as your thousands of papers of medical research.
yeah, it's like this needs to change, this whole attitude.
So I'll say, if you guys haven't seen it, I recommend it. But for our listeners who haven't seen it, I recommend it. There's a YouTube channel from, I want to say, College Humor called What If Google Was Just a Guy?
Yeah, seen that.
Oh, I love that series.
And it's a great series. One of the best bits in that series, in my opinion, is a woman goes in and it's like, proof that vaccines cause autism. It's like, proof that vaccines don't cause autism, giant box full of papers. No, proof that they do not cause autism, one paper. I knew it!
I actually would like to include a clip like that in a video of mine. Problem is that I've had this problem on my channel where I really don't like including clips from like other movies or anything, like the more like mini clips that a lot of YouTubers use. I don't like including them on my channel, and it's a two-part issue. One, I think this diverts from whatever message you're trying to give. Two, I'm lazy.
I think those are two excellent reasons. I mean, obviously we're a live show format, so we can't exactly insert clips easily. But even when I did pre-record it, it's like, no, I don't want to do clips. It's stick to the message. The message should stand on its own. You shouldn't need to do all these gimmicks.
If you want to have a skit gimmick somewhere in your show, then you can do it on your own pretty easy.
Yeah, and it can be fun. But it's something original instead of just copying something out of somebody else's work. I almost hate saying that because it's like, no, I've seen people who do that very well, and it can be funny and creative, but it's just not the way I do things.
Yeah, that's fair. There are some people that can string it in and make it fun and beamy and interesting, but at the same time, there are some people who, like the guy I recently covered, and I'm going to be covering more of because holy crap, his argumentation is absolutely horrible. Damien Prasalandes. And a lot of his more recent videos are just filled with memes humor. And it's like, okay, yes, this makes your video more watchable than if you were just a talking head. But it also makes you look like your audience is nothing but a bunch of people who can't pay attention to your message otherwise.
Yeah. So what's, real briefly, since one, we're running out of time, and two, you have videos on this, and the point here is to encourage people to go check them out. What's his deal? Why are you covering him?
So originally, there's been a want for me on my channel to branch out into other things, but I've got to make sure that they're still related enough to my channel's message of mitigating harm, basically, that I can still cover them. So originally, when he made his video about how video gamers are all fat losers and therefore...
Oh wait, that guy!
Basically.
Now I remember.
Yes. So that was the first video that I covered on, and I did it originally because I was like, okay, well, this is an interesting topic, and it's a little different, and it lets me branch out a little bit, and like, outside of just countering certain theistic arguments or countering woo. So originally just an exercise in would this be fun to do? And then he released a follow-up video. And he tweeted at me as well. So I was like, okay, well now I've got some interaction from Damien, I can do a follow-up video on him. And then the more videos of his channel that I started to look through, the more I realized that some of his messages are actively harmful, like the one about a masturbating man. He's got another one where he says that depression is a real thing.
Oh God.
And at this point now we've got and I'm not tackling that one because every time that I try to say that video, Erin points at me and lets me know that she's covering it. So anyway, but because he's got messages like that on his channel, now it's not just, oh, I wanna have fun with this guy whose argumentation is bad. Now it's, okay, we've got an influencer on a platform who's actively delivering a harmful message. The message doesn't have to be religious for it to be in my wheelhouse.
No. And we have in the people that work on the show a lot of examples of depression. We have a lot of friends who have depression. Shannon Q is not the only person who loses her shit over that's kind of insanity.
No, and I feel bad for Shannon because when she got on her entire case about the Christian counseling deal, is because I sent her a video from that guy and she got mad, very mad.
I actually wound up, after seeing her video, I hadn't known you had sent it to her, but I actually wound up covering that guy. That guy is a scumbag. She had a good reason to be mad.
Oh yeah, no, she definitely did. Like, originally when we did our video on Does Christianity Cure Depression, we were framing it because S.J. Thomason had said Christianity Cures Depression on Twitter. Problem is that around that time, I was still trying to be cordial with S.J. Shannon is friends with S.J. And so we all kind of basically agreed we're not going to talk about S.J. Even though she's the catalyst to making this video, we're not going to talk about her, we're going to talk about the topic. So what's the best way we can frame this? Well, I found a Christian counseling video, sent it to Shannon and said, this is probably going to be a good way of framing this that does not involve SJ, so that we can get the message out that we need without throwing someone under the bus unnecessarily. Unfortunately, well, or fortunately, depending on.
No, they needed to be called out. I'd say it's fortunate.
Shannon took it upon himself to make more videos on Christian topics, which is good, because it wasn't something that I was planning on doing at the time. So having somebody who psychology is their wheelhouse and could make a good case against that person and could go against them and show why what they're doing is wrong, that was good. So that was one benefit of us trying to seek cordiality at that point, is that it just so happened to throw that video out there.
See, I've known one Christian counselor in my life, but he did it correctly because he went to an actual accredited university, got his degrees. He's every year or however many years it took, he went through the classes to keep his accreditations up to date, and he was licensed through the state as a proper counselor who happened to be a Christian priest.
We're getting low on time.
Yeah, we're technically over time.
Yeah.
So regrettably, sirs, thank you for coming on. We're going to have to wrap it up, given it's 7:30, and there's another. The downside of doing it in a formal studio instead of at my house is there's another show coming in. But if you would be so, to give you the chance, please plug your own channel and anything project you have in the works at the moment.
Sure thing. So right now, I'm going to be doing my first polymorph video, and I'm finishing up the creationist video where they were quote lining a bunch of scientists called evolutionists say the oddest things.
Oh,
on my channel, I have it said it's evolutionists say the darndest things because I'm from the South and I think darndest is a funny word.
I don't disagree with you.
But past that, you can find my channel on YouTube, youtube.com/Suris the Skeptic. You can also find me on Twitter @Suris the Skeptic. And I'm going to be live doing Hammered Out here in about 50 minutes.
Cool. And folks, link in the description, of course.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, we may, you're an atheist, I'm a theist, but I have a lot of respect for the work you do. And the reality is, this nonsense needs to be called out. Christian, my own message, as I've said it more than once, but to get back on my big point, is like Christians need to be more compassionate and tolerant. Actually, everybody needs to be more compassionate and tolerant. It's just something as a society we need. And go, like I've said on faith healing, and it's true of a lot of the other medical quackery out there. If you want to pray to God for your health, do it, but go to the doctor. Take your medicine. And anyone who tells you to stop taking medicine because God will magically heal your depression is a bad person.
They're not your friend.
They're not serving God, in my opinion. It's like, to put it in religious terms, because one, they're religious, and two, the people that are listening to them are probably also religious. Anyone who tells you to throw away your antidepressants because demons cause your depression is not serving God.
Yeah.
As a religious person, I won't say they're not Christian, but what they're doing is not in service of God. And the only reason I won't say they're not Christian is because I don't want to do this No True Scotsman.
I mean, did
You
your
lost the human, go right ahead.
trigger on board?
Yeah, mine didn't, but yeah, the fairy thing. Yeah. But it's like, do it, and it's true for sort of like B17, which is for cyanide, or drink your own urine. With a lot of the medical stuff, it's like, if you want to try it, go ahead, but don't stop taking your actual medicine. And do your homework and make sure it's not going to kill you itself.
Anyway.
Yeah, unfortunately, B17 can do it for that matter. If you aren't familiar with it yet, look up jelly juice.
Oh, I'm very familiar with the salt compound in jelly juice.
I'm sorry. Just because no one should have to be familiar with that train wreck.
They shouldn't, but they are.
Yeah. I'm afraid, though, we do need to plug our last sponsor that we need to get out of here so the next show can come in.
Yes.
Sir, thank you for joining us. You've been a lot of fun. As I've happily said to just about every guest we've had, you're always welcome back here. But folks, that's going to wrap it up for tonight. Before we go, we do need to plug our other sponsor. So these days, aside from all the dangers of medical quackery, internet security is a big issue. everybody worries about viruses and hackers and identity thieves, people taking your credit card information. A really good way to protect your private information is a virtual private network, a VPN. And one of the best out there is NordVPN. Nord uses military-grade encryption. The prices are very affordable, and you get a 30-day money-back guarantee. On top of that, Nord uses a service because of the way that Nord works, where you're signing into their server and then signing into the internet from there. You can vary where you're signing in from. So if, say, for example, you're signing in from a country that restricts your internet usage, looking at you, China, you can sign in as if you're signing in from the United States and not have their restrictions. You can sign in from England and see what the internet's like for the English, for that matter. There's a lot of options. You can go to the link in the description below. You can get your trial membership, see what you think, and you'll help out the show by doing so. And you'll be glad you did. I use it, and our currently on hiatus co-host Chris uses it as well.
Yes.
I also want to remind everybody that next week we are going to be having writer and game developer as John Ross, the mind behind Group Thaumaturgy, Ursia Grave of Heroes, Silicon Valley Tarot, and many, many, many more. It's too long to get into everything on the show. John's a very good guy. We're looking forward to it. We just booked the week after that, it looks like, Alex Strang, who's another game developer, who I'm going to be speaking at an event with. We'll talk about more next week because we're definitely out of time. But that's going to do it for tonight, everyone. This is Kevin Mears saying good night and God bless.
Keep your fangs sharp.
Good night, everybody.